Howdy everyone, Runt9 here, and welcome to my top 10 Nova Drift upgrades. This is going to be a list of my personal opinion on the 10 upgrades in Nova Drift that I personally like the most. It's very subjective, and I mean there's some things in here that may be like just objectively good or agnostically good, and you may agree with me, but I think in general this should prompt some interesting discourse, because I also have a very different Nova Drift playstyle from the overall meta. A lot of the meta is focused on crash damage builds or builds that are less reliant on weapon damage. I'm very big into weapon damage builds. I really enjoy them. And you may say, well, weapon damage builds aren't that great. I have plenty of 1.5 million plus runs. Don't worry about that. And I'm generally a bad video game player. So I'm excited to see what you guys think. So as we go through this, write down some notes and let me know in the comments what you thought about this top 10 list. In addition, this is current as of, early May 2020. So the game is still in early access. As things go by, there's going to be a lot of balance and a lot of new content. So this will be probably pretty quickly out of date within the next few months. But I'm excited about that. Well, without further ado, how about we jump in with number 10, Revelation. And if you guys know me, you're probably surprised that Revelation is this low, because for a long time I pretty much said if I see Revelation, I'm taking it on any run. The reason why I don't immediately take it on every run is I think there's some times where if I already have Obsession, or if I'm on a run where really I don't need wild mods that badly, I may not take Revelation. I do think that it's agnostically good, and as you can see here, it triples the next wild metamorphosis mod that you take. If you're running a build where, a Twin Strike or a Heavy Caliber or Solar Heart really cranks it up, and getting 3 of them is incredibly good, don't get me wrong, I think Revelation is very fantastic, but I do think that it's a little bit more niche than I initially gave it credit for. It's not always the best option available, but I do think Revelation is one of those mods that you're pretty much going to take just about every time you see it. I think the biggest reason for me why it's at number 10 is I don't think it's as high of impact as some of the other things on this list. There's some wild mods that, yes, getting 3 of them could really take your build up to another level, but Revelation, it's essentially you're getting 3 mods for the price of 2, because you have to take Revelation and then you get 3 wild mods. Whereas if you just took the single wild mod and then took it again, you would have 2 instances of it. So it's a buy 2 get 1 free kind of thing. And so when you do the math and figure all that out, I think Revelation is incredibly good. And again, there's 100 and something total mods in the game, like 130, 140 when you factor in bodies and weapons. So this is still the top like 8% of every upgrade in the game. I do think Revelation is really good, but I don't think Revelation is as good as I initially gave it credit for. So that said, it is incredibly good, and I do think that there's so many builds that like Revelation is just an auto take. But I think that's where we're going to leave that one off, is Revelation is very good. But I think the mod itself isn't as good as the wild mods that it buffs or supports, and thus I do have to drop it a little bit on the list because of that. But moving on to number 9, Antimatter Rounds. Now again, this is one of those that with some builds, Antimatter Rounds is easily the number 1 mod on that build. I think Flak, especially if you're going for, a charge shot, burst fire flak type thing, you're going to want Antimatter Rounds 100%. Anything where a bunch of projectiles are coming out, Salvo loves it, Torrent can love it, so as long as you can mitigate the self-damage, it's incredibly good. So as you can see here, the biggest piece for me of Antimatter Rounds is that 18 flat damage. But you figure, each flak shot doesn't do a bunch of damage on its own. If you add 18 flat damage to it, that's a lot. And the size and projectile velocity is pretty solid as well. Again, I think this is one of the biggest enablers for high-level flak damage, flak weapon builds. In addition, I do really like it on salvo. I think that combination got nerfed just a little bit after it got buffed, or maybe I have that backwards. I do think that it's really, really good on salvo. I think the self-damage was kind of corrected a little bit. And I mean, obviously you have to mitigate the self-damage, but there might be some other things on the list here that kind of help mitigate that just a little bit. And the biggest thing for me is when you add antimatter rounds onto a build, you see the damage spike. You may be falling a little bit behind the enemy scaling health. When you add it onto a build that needs it, split shot, torrent, flak, salvo, you feel the impact. And because of how impactful that is, that's why I had to put it at number 9, because I just think that Antimatter Rounds is incredible. And even with the big negative of the heavy self-damage, it's more than worth it. So that's why Antimatter Rounds is my number 9. Now for number 8, I didn't rhyme this intentionally, but my number 8 is Terminate. And Terminate is one of those that, you know, most people will take Terminate on just about every build. I'm one of those people. You know, there's almost no build that doesn't benefit from not having to deal the last 12% damage to bosses, or juggernauts for that matter. So, you know, especially with builds that have a slower, not necessarily a lower alpha strike, but higher DPS, not having to do that extra 12% of damage can really save you some trouble. And I'm one of those people that, like, I do my best to get Terminate before wave 40 when you fight the big Omega, because you really want to try to kill it in its first phase. And so if you have Terminate and you get in there, that 12% can make a big difference. The 5% rate of fire, I mean, that's pretty much agnostically useful on anything. But I think for me, Terminate is, it's not build defining, it's not game breaking, but because of its utility, because of the fact that I will take Terminate on literally just about any build, it's so agnostically good. It's so incredibly solid across the board. It's beneficial against bosses. It's beneficial against juggernauts. It's beneficial against eclipses. There's so many things that it's good against. And very, very rarely do I find myself in a position where I don't want it, especially when it's comboed with burn damage. Like, that also is very, very incredible. So for me, I think Terminate was a very, very easy one to put into this top 10. And I think if you can tell the way that I'm talking about it, why I like or love Terminate so much, but I have it down at number 8, that'll tell you just how good everything else on this list is. Such as my number 7, Warp Strike. Now, Warp Strike isn't useful on every single build. I do think that, you know, Flak, maybe not that great. Torrent, maybe not that great. But for the builds that Warp Strike is good on, it is absolutely the single most important thing you can pick up. I think if you run Salvo without Warp Strike, if you run a Dart build without Warp Strike, if you run Railgun, I mean, you can run Railgun without it and it's fine. But I think that on those 3, even Vortex with Warp Strike, it is absolutely vital. I would say that Salvo without Warp Strike is basically begging to not have a successful run. I think that it is mandatory on Salvo and mandatory on Dart. Anything where your projectiles don't degrade, you want Warp Strike. Yes, it lowers the damage on the projectile as it comes around, and you take, you know, it's got that negative rate of fire, negative size velocity. I don't care. I legitimately don't care. And sometimes you may not necessarily want to go through the thrust tree to get to blink to get there. Honestly, that's the only reason it's this low on the list, is because you have to go through blink and snipe to get there. And I think snipe is a solid modifier, and I would take snipe on a lot of builds. But to dig through, you know, picking up your increased thrust and deadly wake and blink that you may not end up using just to get to Warp Strike, that's the only reason it's down here. But it's so good that it overcomes that. And again, like, if you guys have seen the Nova Drift stuff here on YouTube, you know how much I love the dart spam build, where you take, you know, as many twin strikes or volley tree or whatever the case may be as possible, stack up a bunch of projectiles, grab some burst fire, some double tap, some charge shot, whatever, and then just throw a splinter for sure, throw a bunch of darts onto the screen, and then you use warp strike to let them roll over and hunt more enemies down. It like increases the wave clear potential of that build exponentially. It is almost build defining. Again, salvo without warp strike is just so much worse. And I think railgun builds, especially if you're going multiple projectile railgun builds, which I usually do, I think it's also incredible on railgun builds because it can wrap back around. And if you manage to tag a boss twice with it, yeah, it's minus 35% damage, but on a railgun, that's still a lot of damage. So I think Warp Strike is incredible, and it's one of those that I don't take it on every build, but the builds that I do take it on, it is probably one of the most impactful ones. It's one that when you watch my videos, you hear me begging for it. Like, we got to get Blink. We got to get to Warp Strike. We need Warp Strike. I'm begging for it every single upgrade. And that's why it's number 7 on this list. Now, number 6, Gemini Protocol. There's not a lot you can say about it. It splits the damage evenly between your hull and shield. And yes, if you're going rapid reconstruction, obviously you don't take Gemini Protocol. If you're going Omni Shield, obviously you don't take Gemini Protocol. If you're not taking either of those two modifiers, I fail to see a reason not to take it. Okay, crash damage builds, sure. If you're going Shield Breaker and you don't want your shield popping to also deal hull damage, okay, I get that. But you pretty much always want to take Gemini Protocol. And I think it also pairs fairly nicely with Essence Sap as well, because you basically double the effectiveness of your shield. And with Essence Sap or just other regeneration mods, you know, adding in, I mean, you have to get through, what is it, efficiency to get to Gemini Protocol. You can get the first step in the regeneration tree. You can, if you're doing a burn damage build, I forget the name of the final mod in that tree, but the final mod in that tree adds regeneration. Anything that adds regen combined with Gemini Protocol makes it that much stronger. But even without that, doubling the effectiveness of your shield to the point where if you have enough shield cooldown, you can basically survive forever. I mean, I'm overstating it, but I do think that Gemini Protocol is incredibly powerful, and I think it may be a little bit too powerful. But the problem is, you can't really balance it. Like, it's an all or nothing. You can't be like, it splits it, you know, 25 to your shield and 75 to your hull, anything like that. You can't really do that. The other thing is, it works with self-damage. And I think that may be the only thing that you could do to balance it, is make ramping hull, or make hull damage, self-damage, still go straight through to your hull. Because taking Gemini Protocol on a Vortex build, for example, gives you even more time to charge your Vortex. It can make it even bigger. We talked about Antimatter Rounds a little bit ago, and I said there's going to be some ways to mitigate the self-damage coming up. How about Gemini Protocol? Take a little bit of shield damage instead, and then just let it come off cooldown. You know, if you're doing a Burning Star build, go ahead and grab Gemini Protocol and a bunch of regen, and just enjoy the fact that half of the Burning Star damage is going to your shield. In fact, any build where I know there's going to be any self-damage whatsoever, I'm taking Gemini Protocol to split it evenly between hull and shield to effectively cut the incoming self-damage in half. Solar Heart loves Gemini. I could go on and on about how many things work well with it. And again, whether it's self-damage, taking alpha strikes, I mean, okay, you're going to tank a lance to the face from a Seraph. Go ahead and let it split half and half between your hull and shield. And then if you're still circle strafing around it, you have a chance for your shield to come off cooldown before you tank another lance to the face. Maybe you get some regen going via Essence Sap or your various other regen mods, whatever the case may be, and you're good. It's so good. It's so powerful. And Again, I just think that there's other mods that are better, but not that Gemini Protocol is even remotely close to bad. Again, it is number 6 on a top 10 list of like 150 things. It's incredibly powerful. Now, you're probably wondering, getting to number 5, are there even going to be any weapons, shields, or bodies on this list? Well, yes. Here's a body for you. Firefly. There's not a lot to say. I mean, just look at the list of modifiers here. You have thrusters that deal 1,000 damage per second if you can keep enemies inside them. And they also add 120 burn damage per second ignites onto the target. Combine that with the Candescence tree, increasing that burn duration, it's insane amounts of damage. Also, all you got to do to get the thrusters bigger, just add some thrust size mods. Hey, you know what works great with it? Deadly Wake. How do you get there? Another plus 25% thrust. So now you have a trail of fire from behind you in addition to a larger flame behind you. But that's not even the best part. Don't get me wrong, I love the Firefly burning damage. You know how much I love my fire damage builds. We ran a Trogdor build a few days ago on Nova Drift that was basically a Firefly body. We didn't even take Hypothesis. We just went Hidden Power and just loaded up on as many different ways to deal burn damage as possible and just nuked enemies. But it's not even the best part. It's the 20% resistance to self-damage. You know the only other way that you get that much self-damage resistance in one fell swoop is core shielding at the end of the armor stack mod tree. And that's the only other mod in the game that gives that much self-damage resistance in one go. And as we just talked about Gemini Protocol, okay, go ahead and put Gemini Protocol on a Firefly, and now that 20% self-damage resistance combined with Gemini splitting it equally between your hull and shields, you've effectively negated a lot of self-damage short of, Vortex ramping up to obscene levels or siege weaponry ramping up to obscene levels. 20% resistance to self-damage is a lot. If you add that on top of core shielding, you're at 40. It's incredible. Resistance to crash damage is also pretty nice. I don't run crash damage builds with Firefly. I don't think you really want to, but if you do and you grab Purge out of the Candescence tree, it goes along perfectly with it because you're already doing burn damage. You already upped your burn damage. You're already igniting them a million different ways, and then you bump into them. You already got some crash damage resistance. Now you Purge for a big chunk of damage. It has no negatives. There's not a single negative on this entire body. So many other bodies in the game. I mean, take Assault, for example. Assault has lower hull because it's meant to be glass cannon. I think you can be more glass cannon with Firefly because you can add some of the self-damage mods with less risk than Assault and be more powerful because you have the base 100 hull. You don't lose any hull taking a Firefly body. And even better than that, you gain 140 thrust. You gain 140 thrust. That makes it easier to dodge, so you're less likely to take damage in the first place. So you can take Juggernaut and you're still faster because it's only minus 20%. I mean, I'll do the math in my head, but I'm pretty sure 20% of 140, that's going to be 30 it's going to be 28. So take 28 off of that, you're at 112. 112 thrust, I'm pretty sure, is still faster than default. You're still faster than default with taking Juggernaut, and you have that much more hull. How many good things can I say about Firefly? And there's so many builds that work well with it. Again, with the Dart Spam build, I always take Firefly and the Halo Shield, and I already know I'm going to add more burn damage with the Candescence tree. And Firefly early game, it gets you out of so many tough spots. If you take Firefly with a weapon that takes a while to scale, like Torrent or Dart or, Railgun is pretty decent early game, but even on a Railgun build, you run up to that first Spitfire and you just go in circles and you let your thruster deal the bulk of the damage. And again, every time you can sit there for a second on him, dealing that 1,000 damage per second, igniting it for 120 damage per second, it's a huge amount of early game power. And if you go all in on a Firefly build, then you basically just run around the screen in circles and everything just dies instantaneously. I mean, I know in that video we were killing jugs in like 2 seconds because and it was ticking for like 15, 16,000 damage per second. It was incredible. I can't say enough good things about the Firefly body. I take it on almost every single build. Like the vast majority of videos on YouTube are Firefly body as the base with something else. There's no other body that comes close to the damage, the utility, and the benefits without having some distinct drawback that takes it back at least a couple steps from its positives. You can say, oh yeah, battery is good. You have to deal with the different firing angle. Courser is faster, I think, but now you're firing at a 90-degree angle. You're firing perpendicular to yourself. Assault has a negative. The Hullbreaker build, you lose a lot of weapon capabilities while you're getting your crash damage ramped up. Firefly is just that good. But you know what I think is even better? That's my number 4, loaded mines. And you're going to look at this and be like, well, yeah, loaded mines is good, but doesn't it need so many other things to go with it? Not really. I think that there is pretty much no weapon. I mean, maybe railgun, but even then, railgun loaded mines is a lot of fun too if you can get the projectile count up. There's a lot of weapons that work well with loaded mines, and whether you go mortar or not, or whether you go charged mines or not, this is something that I debated on. Was like, mortar and charged mines are both good, but they start with loaded mines. Without loaded mines, those don't exist. And I mean, yes, they do take it up to another level, but I think there are builds that I want loaded mines without mortar. There are builds that I want loaded mines and maybe not charged mines. I mean, that one, maybe not. I think charged mines is just also good if you have loaded mines. But loaded mines is build defining. Flat out, if you take loaded mines, you're saying, okay, we're doing a loaded mines build. Very, very few mods in the game are straight up, we're doing a blank mod build. Loaded mines is build defining. And the thing is, you can say, we're doing a loaded mines build and not have to sit there and re-roll your weapon or shield. Maybe you have to re-roll to try to dig for architect or engineer, but the thing is, I've done a loaded mines build with Firefly before, our number 5, and it still works fine. Yeah, you don't necessarily need, you don't necessarily have the same power that you do with an architect loaded mines build. If you grab minefield with engineer, you have a bunch more loaded mines, but I don't think a regular mine build is nearly even remotely in the same universe as loaded mines. Loaded mines plus pulse, incredible. Yeah, I like mortar pulse, but the thing with mortar pulse is you have to aim it. If you go engineer plus loaded mines plus pulse, now you're just throwing out a ton of these incredible damage mines. Loaded mines plus vortex, tons of fun. Loaded mines plus torrent, a lot of really solid projectiles. Add antimatter rounds on top, you got a stew cooking. Loaded mines plus flak, split shot, railgun. It's not as good with split shot or railgun, but it's still good. I've run loaded mines with darts, and it takes a long time to get going, but when it does, it's incredible. So yeah, you can see there's also really no negative to it. You don't, like, when you take loaded mines, you get loaded mines in addition to your weapon. If you don't go overseer, you can have loaded mines plus your regular weapon. And that's a huge amount of utility. There's no downside. And rate of fire and projectile count, probably things you were getting anyways. So if you want to run loaded mines plus a weapon damage build, by all means, do it. If you want to roll it into overseer and make that your primary, absolutely. And loaded mines can be very, very powerful. I legitimately think that loaded mines may be too strong. Like, I think it should potentially lower the damage of the weapon instances that it creates. So I think as it is right now, it may be too strong. That's how good I think it is I legitimately think loaded mines is overpowered. Now for my number 3, If we're talking about things that are build defining, how about charge shot? What do you say about charge shot? Like, legitimately, there are some builds that don't necessarily work with it. You know, maybe you don't go charge shot torrent. Okay, sure. But how many weapons benefit greatly the instant they get charge shot? Salvo is one of the first ones that comes to mind. Like, salvo without charge shot, you basically can't run a salvo build without charge shot unless you load up on things like projectile count and rate of fire and stuff like that, and take like courser body. Like, it's a very, very specific build. Whereas otherwise, you just take charge shot and do whatever else you want with salvo. And I was like, okay, well, surely barrage split shot is the premier split shot build. We did an experiment, I think 2 weeks ago on YouTube, where we took charge shot plus some burst fire stuff and did that with split shot. And I found it better and easier to play than barrage split shot. I felt like the damage output was higher, and it was actually better. I take charge shot on so many builds. If you look at my top 10 high scores, both for my YouTube setup and my solo/stream setup, almost every single build has charge shot. Railgun loves it. Salvo loves it. Dart loves it. Even stuff like split shot and torrent can still work with it. Grenade, absolutely incredible. Pulse loves it. What more can you say? What more can you say? Yeah, you lose 30% thrust while charging. Doesn't matter. It adds more projectiles to ones that fire more than one base projectile. There you go. Split shot fires more projectiles. Torrent, more projectiles. Flak, charge shot. I mean, you take charge shot plus antimatter rounds. If you have just those two, flak is a million capable. You can literally spend everything else on defenses. Charge shot, antimatter rounds, flak is million plus capable. You're done. Charge shot is that good. Rate of fire affects charge rate. Exactly. You go get more rate of fire on stuff like split shot and darts anyways. So why would you not? Go ahead and tack on some double taps. I mean, you don't want to overdo it, but it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. For me, it's not just build defining. It is literally my favorite build, quote unquote, in the game, is to take charge shot plus some weapon and go. But it's still only number 3. Let's find out what number 2 is. Essence Sap. I've already mentioned it a few times, and I know there are those of you watching right now that were just waiting for it. You knew Essence Sap was in the top 10. It was just a matter of where. And you're probably like, what beat out Essence Sap? I know that's what you're thinking right now. And don't get me wrong, it took me a really long time to piece together the top 4 or 5 here, because I think they're fairly interchangeable. I almost put Essence Sap below Charge Shot because I think you can run Charge Shot builds without Essence Sap and be happy. But here's the thing. With the way Essence Sap works right now, and I think primarily it is brokenly overpowered on burn damage. Essence Sap should not heal you with burn damage. That breaks it to an obscene degree, and that's part of the reason it's number 2, is if you take Corrosion, it doesn't matter what else you're doing, Essence Sap plus Corrosion is overpowered. But even besides that point, I found that I've gone Rapid Reconstruction, I've done Omni Shield, I've done, various other different types of things. I've run a bunch of different shields. The single greatest tool for your survivability in this game, as of the current patch, is Essence Sap. There is not a single modifier in the entire game that is better for your survivability than Essence Sap. I do think, and this is why Gemini Protocol was on the list, is I do think Gemini Protocol is second for your survivability. But the problem when you combine Gemini plus Essence Sap is until you get overwhelmed, which basically means you either can't deal enough damage because you didn't focus enough on damage mods, or it's so late in the game that it's like you have to just be able to clear the screen and you have to be able to dodge. Essence Sap plus Gemini Protocol is the most broken combination for survivability in the game. I don't mean broken in the way that it's like it's too overpowered, but I think that nothing else comes close enough to the sheer survivability that it offers to even think about going any other direction. I don't think Omni Shield comes close. I don't think Rapid Reconstruction comes close. I think Essence Sap on its own, even if you don't take Gemini Protocol, I think Essence Sap is good. But I think Essence Sap plus Gemini Protocol is the primary form of survivability. I think you ignore taking a shield at all. Stick with the default shield. You don't need another shield thing. Save that upgrade for something else and just roll with base shield, Essence Sap, Gemini Protocol, and go. Now, I'm saying a lot of stuff about Essence Sap plus Gemini Protocol. Do I think it's good without it? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think Essence Sap is good without burn damage? Oh, for sure. Is it as good without either of those two things? Maybe. So, should it be ranked on its own right? Yes. I still think it's number 2. The only reason it's not number 1 is because I think it's only boosted to overpowered levels because of burn damage and because of Gemini Protocol. If Essence Sap stopped healing you based off of burn damage and Gemini Protocol was removed from the game, I would still put it at number 2. Maybe I would put Charge Shot above it. But that's the only reason it is number 2, is if those were removed, I do think Essence Sap would still be the best survivability tool, but not by 10 miles. And that's why it's number 2. So now for the moment you've all been waiting for, especially after seeing that Essence Sap was number 2, let's find out what my number 1 Nova Drift upgrade is. And how could it not be? It's Twin Strike. I mean, I know that Chimeric was joking when he said this, but I know there was also a hint of seriousness. I made a meme or whatever on the Nova Drift Discord one time about Twin Strike, and he said, jokingly, people won't let me remove it from the game, but I think it's still too overpowered. I do think that you could balance this in such a way with negative modifiers that it would bring it in line. It's also a rare recursive wild mod, so it's hard to find. But I honestly don't care about the minus recovery or minus shield cooldown, because if I kill things that much faster because of Twin Strike, here's the thing. You have to compare Twin Strike to the volley tree. And when you compare the negative, there is no decrease to your damage output when you take Twin Strike. You lose some survivability. So taking a bunch of Twin Strikes pushes you more into glass cannon territory, but it doesn't lower your damage. And that means that Twin Strike scales your damage exponentially. I do mean exponentially, because every projectile you add, especially with something with a high rate of fire like Split Shot or Dart by default. I mean, Dart's damage, it definitely scales exponentially because each dart you stick in an enemy does that much more damage. But Twin Strike isn't just the best modifier in the game. It's the most overpowered thing in all of Nova Drift. There are builds, in my opinion, that I will legitimately ignore the volley tree and just wait for Twin Strikes to appear. And do I want Revelation or Obsession with Twin Strike? Yeah, absolutely. But honestly, I don't even care. If I see a Twin Strike, I'm probably taking it. I won't take it on a Vortex build. Okay. But Railguns, Darts, Split Shot, Torrent, Grenades. I don't think it necessarily works with Pulse. Flak, I'll even take it with Flak because it lowers the projectile spread. Now, I won't take it to the point where it wraps back around, and I do think this is an interesting aspect of it, is the negative 15% projectile spread will stack, and then you'll have a negative fire and angle, which will then start to fan out again. That's a thing. But legitimately, nothing comes close to Twin Strike. Did I think about putting Essence Sap at number 1? Yes, until I was like, but wait, Twin Strike is still in the game. Until the day Twin Strike isn't in the game, or until the day Twin Strike lowers your DPS in some way, I think it's number 1. And I don't think anything else can just come close to how powerful Twin Strike is. like if you get a Twin Striker too early, you can ignore the volley tree. Even if your build 110% needs multiple projectiles, one Twin Strike, even one Twin Strike, ignore the volley tree. It's done. You don't need it. You don't need it. You're good. Because the volley tree will lower your damage so much per projectile, whereas Twin Strike doesn't. It lowers your survivability. Pick up a couple Twin Strikes, forget the volley tree even exists. That's it. Twin Strike is the most overpowered thing in Overdrift. It is my personal favorite modifier in the game, and legitimately, I think there's a lot of things on this list that can be argued with, but from a pure weapon damage build perspective, I think Twin Strike can't be argued with as the most valuable modifier, body, weapon, whatever in the game. And I mean, you can argue with me on it. I probably will still come back with some argument. And yes, it does lower your survivability. I will keep saying that. I have run into problems where I took too many Twin Strikes and it killed me. But I've also run into situations where Essence Sap couldn't out-heal the incoming damage. But if I had another Twin Strike, I would have killed the enemy before I died. I think Twin Strike is the number one. And that's my list, and I'm sticking to it. So let's recap. At number 10, we had Revelation. Number 9 was Antimatter Rounds. Number 8 was Terminate. Number 7, Warp Strike. Number 6, Gemini Protocol. Number 5, Firefly. Number 4, Loaded Mines. Number 3, Charge Shot. Number 2, Essence Sap. And number 1, Twin Strike. I feel pretty confident in this list. You know, I threw it together a little bit quicker than I wanted to. But after, you know, fudging with it a little bit, and especially after doing this video, I honestly couldn't see myself moving this list around at all. Like, as I was making my explanations for everything, I'm like, nope, this is my top 10. 100% this is my top 10. And probably the only question that you're going to ask as far as like knowing me is, where's Obsession? I thought Obsession was like probably top 5. Obsession's falling out a little bit for me because in order to reach those 1.5 million plus runs, by the time you get there, there's so many wild mods you're going to want to take that you could be down 25, 30, 40% of maximum hull and shields. That's a lot. I think the negative on Obsession is really well balanced, but if your build is heavily dependent, or not necessarily heavily dependent, but requires wild mods to reach upper echelons, you can't afford Obsession. I think Obsession gets you to 1 million faster, but is the reason why you die between 1 and 1.5. And that's why Obsession is off the list. Even though I do think that below 1 million early to mid game, Obsession is probably the best modifier in the game. It's just that after that point, you lose so much survivability that the negative of it properly balances it, and that's why it fell out of my top 10. Everything else, I think there's a good explanation for. You know how I play, and the number of builds that I've taken that has all or most of these top 10 items on it is numerous. And so you probably knew, for the most part, what was on this list. But anyways, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Definitely let me know in the comment section below what you think about it. Looking forward to doing more top 10 videos in the future. And it actually ran a little bit longer than I thought. When I got to number 8, number 7, I was like 7-8 minutes in. So maybe be 20 minutes. But I have so much to say about some of these top ones that it went on a little bit longer than expected. Anyways, if you did make it through the video, the single best thing you can do to help me and the channel is to click the like button. That tells YouTube that, hey, other people might be interested in seeing videos like this as well. It's the best way to help the channel grow. In addition, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I do a bunch of cool content on here, and you should probably check that out as well. Make sure you check out the link tree in the description below. We do streams on Twitch 5 days a week, twitch.tv/Rut9plays, and you can check out the community Discord link there as well. But until the next top 10, I'm Rut9, and I'll see you later.